I like to start the show on time. Bonnie's not with me to start the recording, so I just did. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the monthly show of the Northern California Recycling Association Zero Waste Advocacy Committee, or ZWAC. And I like to think of ZWAC as a verb meaning to promote zero waste. So a proper slogan might be, you'd like to be ZWAC'd, wouldn't you? Anyway, so tonight, as Ed Sullivan might have said a long time ago, we have a really great shoe tonight. We have the main topic is what's new in 2022 for the bottle bill. We have with us, and this will start at 6 o'clock, we have two of the people who combined probably know more about the California bottle bill than anybody else. Susan Collins of the Container Recycling Institute and Jeff Donlevy of Ming's Recycling and the State Commission on Recycling Markets. They'll be here at 6. At 5:30, we always feature one of the recycling pioneers from the Recycling Archives. And tonight, we're thrilled to have Ken Dunn. And I especially wanted Ken for this session on the bottle bill because he was one of the early adopters of community redemption centers, and he has a wonderful story about that, taking place in the south side of Chicago before, it was cool for, Barack and Michelle Obama to be there. So we're going to have readings from his interview with the Recycling Archives, which we've never had before, because on our very first ZWAC show, Ken was featured and he was interviewed by me, but we didn't have his interview ready. So Susan Kinsella, who is our director of the Recycling Archives, is going to make some readings from Ken's interview, after which Ken will be available to answer questions. So Susan, if you would take it away.
Sure. Okay. Well, Ken Dunn grew up on a farm in the heartland of the United States. The philosophy that he learned in his farming community leads him to always be asking what needs to be done and who can do it. As he said, I came to Illinois from a very well-functioning agricultural community further west in Kansas. My family farmed organically there on the Kansas prairie. We didn't let anything go to waste. Eventually, I came to the University of Chicago to do graduate study in the social justice field. I noticed right away that there was a real need to start rebuilding a functioning community in South Chicago. It could be done, I thought. The key was setting up a resource handling system that did not waste any of the planet's resources. I thought, what could we do to get people to think they could change things? What if we got the community involved in changing the most local activity possible? That would be how the community collects and processes its discards. It struck me that if you gave the community the experience of being able to choose a fair and equitable way to take out the garbage, everyone would start thinking, hey, if we can change this, then maybe we could change things on the city or the state or the national or even the international level. As a University of Chicago student in the late 1960s, I had this notion of doing an intervention as a class project. My experiment would be an approach to social justice and equality at the same time. I prepared by doing research to find out more about unemployment and to figure out how to estimate the number of vacant lots in Woodlawn, the neighborhood just south of the university. Woodlawn was a disadvantaged community. The area's resources had been extracted and not put back. I found that there was 50% unemployment. Buildings had been torn down and not replaced. Around 50% of the lots in the neighborhood were vacant. There were many unmet needs that were actually acutely felt by the people who lived there. So I drove a van and 6 empty barrels to a vacant lot next to a liquor store that I knew about. And as expected, there were 5 or 6 guys drinking there, and they liked to throw their empty bottles over a fence into the vacant lot. I said, hey guys, work with me here. We'll pick up all those empty bottles, sort them by color, and put them in these barrels. And after they're full, I'll go sell them. I'll be back here in 2 hours after I sell everything. I'll split up the money with you. I'll take one part, and each of you that works will take an equal part. And so they did it. They helped me fill the barrels with recyclables. I got back to them a couple of hours later with the money. It turned out that an equal share came to about $2.75 a piece. which was at least approaching a fair wage at that time. It had taken us about an hour to pick up and sort the bottles and cans. So my experiment seemed promising. I realized that building value out of unrecognized resources was not just a theoretical thing, something I could build a PhD on. It was a project that could actually be done. It would make a difference in social justice terms, and it could grow of its own accord. As I passed out the money, I saw that the guys were very pleased. And just as I was walking away with my thoughts, one of the guys said, "Hey man, where do we work tomorrow?" And when he said that, I thought, well, expanding materials recovery is one way this community can turn itself around by using the neglected resources that have been left there by outside commercial interests. Still, I was about to say, oh, no, you don't understand. I was doing this as a school project. I might even get a PhD out of this. I'm going to go back and write it up. Others will read it. I'll see some of the results in a few years. But I couldn't bring myself to say that. So I said, I don't know right now where we're going to work next, but I'll be back.
Waiting for connection.
A few days later, I came back from the university with a mimeographed map of the area. I put slots into it every 2 blocks where I would be with a truck at particular times. Hold on a second, I'm gonna. So a few days later, I came back from the university with a mimeographed map of the area, and I put slots into it every 2 blocks where I would be with a truck at particular times. I told people that I would be here and here and here with my scales and cash on a schedule. And that way they could accumulate all the bottles and papers.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Ken, could you, I think we're getting some feedback through your end. Is it possible to mute yourself for a moment?
I'm not sure where to mute.
Or I could mute you too, I guess.
Yeah, you do that.
Maybe I'll do that. Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Oop, no. Okay, Ken, I think you're muted. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay. So I told people that I would be here and here and here with my scales and cash on a schedule. And that way they could accumulate all the bottles and cans and papers. Then they could bring them to me at those designated locations for pickup and payment. And I would weigh them up and I'd pay them cash. When the first day came, it was a resounding success. I filled the truck and spent all the money I brought along to pay the collectors. And then I got the money back at the scrapyard. It was working. That's how the little experiment I tried became a weekly collection route for a mobile buyback service. Now, Ken started that spur of the moment recycling buyback system back in 1967. We think it might have been the first neighborhood recycling system started in the whole United States. And it ran successfully for 50 years, only closing down in 2018. Not only that, but he and his staff also turned those cleaned up empty lots into urban community gardens that grow fresh local food for neighborhoods that typically lack access to that. He called it turn a lot around. They have developed specialized techniques to create urban agriculture and composting programs on industrially devastated spaces. As he explains, what we do before we start farming is to fashion a bowl out of 6 inches of compacted clay with a berm all the way around the outside. These bowls are about 2 feet deep. We fill them with compost, and thus there's no contact with the original contaminated soil at all. Then we grow food in clean composted soil within the bowl. The rich compost allows us to multi-crop. With greenhouses, we can grow up to 10 crops a year in every bed. Those 10 crops a year can produce $160,000 of value on a single 1-acre urban farm. The income lets us employ 5 people per 1-acre farm at a living wage. It's especially good for the workers because they don't have to pay for transportation to their job site because they live next door. And also they can reduce greatly their food costs at home. All of our farmers are allowed to take home as much as they want. Now, You might think that everyone would welcome the ways that Ken has helped revitalize devastated communities through recycling and farming. But the truth is that there are some who feel threatened. Some of those are big multinational corporations that want the recycling business that he has built. And sometimes it's gangs whose lives and habitual activities are changed when the people around them learn how to create farms in the city and build self-sufficiency. But Ken has a philosophical approach to those kinds of threats. As he says, the human mind is an ingenious device. You can almost always come up with a variety of moves you can make before it leads to violence. The idea is never, never to get yourself cornered into a loss. You want to live for another day, the better to support your ideals. That's the way I always treated these kinds of confrontations, so as not to force either they or me to think of eliminating the other. I've had multiple threats against me personally. The first came over the phone. Down here at the Union Hall, said a guy on the line, and I wouldn't recommend harm to anyone, but I'm hearing conversation among some of the guys I work with who are, sort of hot-headed. They want to discourage you from developing your recycling program. I hear them saying that they know where your home is and where your kids go to school and who you're working for and where you work. So this is just a heads up. I'm concerned that there be no violence. I mean, at one point they actually got the city to condemn my home, but the judge sided with me and the case was dismissed. And then there was another time a few years later, a guy called me on the phone. He was very inquisitive about what I was doing, where I could go with a truck to make a pickup, but he wouldn't give me his name or phone number or address. And then he said, I know you work late. I can meet you any place on your route, so we can talk. So this was a second threat, but it was fishy. I was scheduled to do a Dropbox collection early next day in the village of Oak Park. So I said, well, I'll be doing a collection in Oak Park before the city comes alive. I'll be at this address, I think it was on West Madison, at about 5:30 a.m. to meet you. It was a Sunday morning, and he said, okay, I'll meet you there. Actually, I'd given him the address of the parking lot at the Oak Park police station, and 5:30 a.m. was the hour that the shift changed. So there would be lots of police walking around. I was there at 5:30 a.m. for the appointment. This four-wheel drive came in with four burly guys in muscle shirts inside. And as soon as they turned into the parking lot, they stopped. Police were walking everywhere. I acknowledged them with a friendly wave and walked over to their vehicle. And I said, oh, so we were supposed to meet here to talk, right? And they said, well, no, we were just passing through. I think we got all that we wanted. And they just drove away. Today, Ken tells me he sees us so societally in a race to the bottom, more concerned with appearances than with reality or integrity or the real joys of life. And I asked him whether he sees any ways to deal with that, and he answered, one thing I learned from my philosophy studies is that there can be combined development. You can skip over phases of a process that seems to be taking just too long. That is, if it takes another 20 years to convince everybody that industrial society is on the wrong path, we just don't have that time, especially regarding climate change. So we have to go directly to giving individuals the experience of what the community can feel like if it is healthy and growing and eating well together. And to that end, Ken Dunn continues to develop urban farms where neighborhoods grow healthy foods locally, where neighbors collect resources to return to use in manufacturing, and where they heal their neighborhoods that were formerly given up as lost.
Thank you, Susan. All right, I'm going to unmute you, Ken, and people can ask you questions. I'm going to try to unmute you, I should say.
Great story.
That's Ken's.
So Ken, you should be unmuted from my end now.
He's still looking muted online though.
Ken, can you talk to make sure, see if you're. No, I'm having trouble.
Can you unmute everybody then?
Well, I can mute everybody, Rick, but I can't unmute everybody, I don't think. And I'm scared to do anything. I see X to unmute and I click that and nothing happens.
Well, you're unmuted, so if it's individual, that might be it.
No, I'm doing it on Ken's number.
Okay. Oh, it looks like he's unmuted now.
Okay, great.
Oh, maybe not.
Got it.
Hi, Ken. We got you
All
back.
right.
So
Good.
does anybody have a question they want to ask Ken? And if they don't, I'll ask. So I'll ask Ken.
Yeah.
So you've had an amazingly great and long career with resource recovery and urban farming. And I think everybody on this call is younger than you and would aspire to have, do those kinds of great things. Are there any cautionary tales you'd like to pass on? Are there things that you wish you'd done better or differently?
Well, I think I was just fortunate. I was born into a climate collapse. That is, I was born in 42, and in 43, my dad bought a neighbor's farm that had been part of the Dust Bowl. It was unfarmable because it had been farmed with industrial practices, not leaving organic matter on the soil, stripping off everything for sale, and just soil particles without organic matter is subject to being blown around. So the neighboring farm my dad bought for almost nothing was a sand dune, like a tree row 30 feet deep was a sand dune, and the rest of the field was just sand. But at age 3, I started working with him to recover it. But I also learned and investigated our own farm, which was had places where the original prairie was, and that we never had to irrigate it, fertilize it, or anything. It just took care of itself. So I experienced from the age of 3 two contrasts: a ruined farm and a natural farm that was still the original prairie. And so I just thought, well, that would be something we might have to do to avoid losing our farmland. We've got to go back to doing what we had on the original prairie. And by the way, that's what inspired the pan farming that was described in what was read before, that seal with clay and have high organic matter to retain all of the moisture that falls, and you don't have to irrigate. Just like the prairie, there was no irrigation wells at all before humans started farming unsustainably. So pitfalls just don't go through life without a mission. And I think I early found what I wanted to do. And when I actually was not able to make much of a impact on neighboring farmers because they're all stressed just making the cash crop to pay the bills each year, I decided I better come to the heart of industrial society, which I thought probably Chicago. So I've been here ever since.
So it's 55 years from when you started, I think, 1967. And
Yep.
we don't have a dust bowl today, but we've got a lot of potentially ecological calamities. So if you were starting out today and wanted to focus on something you thought would help fix things, what would you do?
Well, I think probably the same thing, but my most recent project is hoping to skip over helping people understand that industrial agriculture is not good for the planet. That is, using stripping all of the product, not leaving organic matter in the soils, and then also just using chemicals and irrigation to keep the plants alive. I would skip directly to giving the experience that I had felt that we had in our community in Kansas. That is, we worked together in harvest, neighbors working together. We had meals in the farm, so we are, in where we were harvesting the crop, we had the meals together. Tables and tablecloths brought out, and the community ate together. That I thought was a wonderful experience. And my most recent project is a larger facility that we can have this experience of neighbors ending the day with producing their own food and preparing it, eating it, and cleaning up together. So we're calling this project the Sustainable Nutrition Institute, and it's kind of an extension of what we've always done on our farms here in the city, that is inviting a well-known chef to prepare a 5-course meal with the product on the farm, with a tablecloth table seating 200 people down the center of the farm, with the meal being the products that was raised on either side of the table. And I usually make a brief statement of to get back to a sustainable and inclusive society, we have to do more of this meeting together outdoors, not where we each have our own economic status to go in to get something to eat or whatever. We're meeting with all of our neighbors and eating a great meal and enjoying the healthy food together. So in some ways, I have always given a little presentation saying, most of the results of industrial society have the end product of diminishing the quality of life. Our transportation system, unwanted deaths. Our policing system, too many guns by both police and residents. Everything you think of, industrial society has moved towards how things that could be positive diminish the quality of life. So we need to get back to a simpler connection to the place we live in. If we take care of that place, will it take care of us? And I think that's how civility started. Organic raiders trampled much and took what they wanted, but they found a space that was attractive, and they thought, if we took care of this place, would it take care of us? And I think people need the experience of eating together without being excluded by color, religion, economic status. We all eat together and enjoy the meal, and that would be what we drastically need. And I think some of the projections is we're going to lose a livable society for our children if we don't make these changes within the next 5 or 10 years. So I would go directly to the community meal as if I started out now.
Well, I have one more question, then I'm going to turn it over. You paint a beautiful picture of that community farm, kind of romanticized, kind of straight out of Oklahoma. And I have a niece and nephew on a farm, and that's kind of in an area where they don't have many neighbors and they don't really get together in a community like you described. But it's a beautiful picture. So I wonder, how do you transplant that beautiful picture to an urban environment like South Chicago or San Francisco or Oakland? What needs to happen to transition that?
Well, we do have an industrial food system that actually provides food lookalikes. The industrial process, farmers grow commodity crops, and those commodities in factories are processed to become food lookalikes that don't have the nutrition and the freedom from additives that can injure our health. So we have to get back to fresh food. the original name we had for these dinners I described, 200 people in the center of the farm, was eating in place, eating in season. And there's something added to the quality of life to look forward to the first strawberries of spring rather than eating them every week, imported from internationally imported. So I think a lot of humanity, the joy of humanity, comes from the pleasures of being appropriate to our climate and our place, not destroying the planet by airlifting strawberries to everywhere all year round. So I'm advocating for everybody recognizing the quality of life I experienced on the farm. And let me just drop in one anecdote. I felt one stern approach from my father. I think I was 3, and he asked me if I had drank.
Oh, I think we've lost Ken.
Uh-oh. He was worried about the charge on his phone.
Which was plugged in.
Yeah.
Well, we just might have to wait for him to return. So I guess we'll have to do that. Susan and Jeff are here. So I think we'll start the what's new in 22 with the bottle bill. And I'm just so thrilled to have them both here. Last year, about a year ago, we had a session of the show where we asked the question, why should we care about the bottle bill? And Susan gave an amazing answer to why we should care about the bottle bill, which convinced everybody on the call that we should in fact care about the bottle bill. So Susan, if you could paraphrase again, why should we care about what happens with the bottle bill? Because there's all these new things with it. And you'll have to unmute.
Yeah, I was diligently muted. Thank you, John. I don't remember what I said last time, but I'll see if I can tell you the things that are the most, why I do this job. I do it because I absolutely deeply believe in container deposit laws. The biggest thing is that in the 20 years before I took this job, when I was working in recycling, I had never seen a program type where if it was designed correctly, you could capture darn near 100% of the materials. That's the single most magical thing about bottle bills, is that the incentive is super powerful. And I call them the rock stars of recycling. If you put a deposit on it, if it's a meaningful level of deposit, and it's a really highly functioning program with, a lot of convenient access for consumers, you can get redemption rates of 90% or more. And there's a lot of programs throughout the world that do exactly that. So it's like, just, do it, get it done, and let's move on to the harder things. And when we do that, the other amazing thing about bottle bills is that, not all items are frequently littered items, but beverage containers are. So it's got a twofold sort of benefit in that you're not only recycling the materials and getting all the energy savings and the greenhouse gas savings from recycling them, but you're also keeping them out of the litter stream, which is huge, with the problems with ocean plastics in the ocean, et cetera. And then they're funded by the producers, not by, government funds, which is another benefit. And so just all around, they work like a charm.
So let me make a counterpoint to this, Jeff. As a person who's, in the business, these things that Susan said sound wonderful. Are we doing all those things? And if not, in 5 minutes or less, why are we not doing them?
Won't take 5 minutes. The only thing that I would add is right now the bottle bill is collecting about $1.6 billion a year in deposits from consumers. And the CRV is actually taxed. So it's also contributing about $120 million a year to the general fund of the state of California. The material coming through the bottle bill programs, the redemption centers, like Susan talked about, it's the cleanest and highest quality material that gets recycled in the United States. So we can feel good about taking material back to redemption centers. The problem that we've faced is the bottle bill has had over 70 amendments in the 30 plus years of its existence. And unfortunately, it's only gotten worse. The biggest problem that we have is we're not providing the convenience to the consumers that was originally anticipated, because when the program first started, convenience was a key. People wanted to get their deposits back. I operated a recycling center in Redondo Beach, and I had people in Mercedes, BMWs, and yes, a Ferrari came into my recycling center to get their deposits back. And that's when it was 2.5 cents, but it was a convenient and clean location that they wanted to go to. With the amendments, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of easing up of the requirements, mainly for the grocer and dealer mandates, where the grocers today, they can cut a check for $3,000 to get out of the program, so they don't have to return the deposits that they took from the consumers. $3,000 back in 1986 was a lot of money. In today's dollars, it's probably just the equivalent to a couple $100 to them. So it's very easy for the grocers to get out of it. A lot of cities are not very welcoming towards the redemption centers, because they would like to have the curbside programs funded using the CRV that's in those containers. So I'll say my 5 minutes is up.
Well, before I turn back to Susan, let me follow up. You talked about the 70 different amendments, and that's probably underestimating it. So as someone who's in the business operating recycling centers, who's supposed to theoretically have a knowledge of the regulatory structure, with 70 amendments and goodness knows how many bills every year and how many times they get amendment, how easy it is for a business person like you to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do?
Very difficult. The two biggest stakeholders that are not represented in Sacramento are the consumers and the recycling centers, because the recycling centers and the processors like Ming's, mostly independent, family-owned, a high percentage minority businesses. They can't afford $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month lobbyists to get involved in the sausage making. It's very difficult.
So Susan, one of the what's new in 22 items is that the idea of adding wine bottles and spirit bottles to the CRV. Where are we on that? Why is that a good thing? And why isn't it just adding more trouble after bad?
It's both. It's both. It is. I mean, it's the only reason it's adding more trouble after bad is because of the fact that the bottle bill is neglected and there isn't convenient access for everyone, and we have these redemption deserts. But hopefully, everybody keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully we can fix both problems at the same time. And certainly the legislature seems to be moving in that direction, because both funding that would fix the redemption desert issue is moving through the legislature, and the wine and spirits bill is moving through the legislature. Your previous entire program talked so much about the coming dangers of climate change. So we have to do everything that we can, everything. And this is one of the easiest options, just, expand an additional, expand an already existing recycling program to recycle more material instead of throwing them into landfill, and reap the benefits of saving carbon and saving energy. So it's completely smart from that perspective. And even though wine and spirits are sort of a small category in terms of number of units of containers, most of the material is glass and it's heavy, it's larger bottles. So we've estimated that if this bill passes, we will be recycling 346,000 tons. I'll say that again, 346,000 new tons of material will be recycled every year as a result of this bill. I think it's the biggest expansion of a bottle bill in terms of tonnage that we've seen in 10 years in the United States. So I'm beyond thrilled about that prospect. That's the whole reason I do my job, right? Is to get more stuff recycled instead of going to landfill. I mean, we all know reduction is better, and we're also working toward, getting more containers and refillables, and that we'll touch on that when we look at the budget change proposal. So that would be fantastic. I do have some issues with the money piece of it. We did an analysis. I provided it to you, John. I don't know if it's already been sent to everybody, but definitely if you want to see the details on this bill, we've got 2 letters that are up on our publications page on containerrecycling.org. One was just a general letter of support for the bill, which gives all the details of how many, millions of containers would be recycled, what the greenhouse gas savings would be, what the tonnage savings would be. But then we did a separate letter afterwards that took us a couple of weeks because it's a full financial analysis of the bill from the perspective of CalRecycle. And this bill, SB 1013, would have a net cost to CalRecycle of almost $40 million. They would be spending more money out on recycling these containers than they would be taking in deposits. And we've just done a supplemental analysis. You guys are the first ones to hear about it because it just got finished up a few hours ago. And we looked specifically at curbside programs. The interesting thing about curbside programs is they're already handling the glass that's going through the curbside programs. But what we found is that even though they're already handling that material, if it's wine and spirits bottles, what will happen under SB 1013 is once those items have a deposit on them and a refund on them, they will be eligible for all the program payments, just like everything else in the bottle bill. And the curbside programs will get an extra $46 million a year without any change to their operations. As a matter of fact, they'll probably lose material from the curbside programs because people like me, I'll take my wine bottles in for redemption now. I won't put them in my curbside bin because I'd rather them go through a very clean form of recycling where I know that a very high percentage of the glass will actually be recycled. I'm going to be thrilled to be doing that. But for the wine and spirits bottles that do end up in curbside programs, those curbside programs will suddenly be getting another $46 million. So that's just absolute windfall profit. I'll stop there.
I'm going to ask Jeff in a moment what he thinks about his 46 million and how he's going to spend it. But before I get there, Susan, you mentioned 2 things were coming up that were going to fix this thing. And one of them was the wine and spirits bill. What's the other one about?
The other one is the budget trailer bill. And I think Jeff might want to talk about that one because he's done a more recent analysis of the amended version of it. But basically, let me backtrack a little bit because one of the things that we didn't really have on the agenda, but I remembered was important, was that there was an oversight hearing of CalRecycle. The last time I spoke to you guys, and I think the last 2 times I spoke to you guys, I told you that CalRecycle was not accurately reporting their finances. They kind of have 2 sets of books. They have a set of books that they turn into the state controller's office, and then they have a different set of numbers that they report to the state legislature. And this has been going on for more than a decade. So the San Francisco Chronicle wrote about it a couple months ago, and that prompted an oversight hearing in the Senate Budget Committee. And the Senate Budget Committee brought CalRecycle in and said, why are you reporting 2 sets of numbers? And also, how many employees are you paying for? Because it appears that, I don't know, 100 more employees are being paid for out of the beverage container budget than just the beverage container folks. But it's not clear. We still don't know. Even though the Budget Committee asked the questions in writing, CalRecycle's response was a non-response. I still don't know how many employees are being paid for out of the beverage container budget. And that should be a clear, easy answer. It should be absolutely transparent. And it's not, even though a legislator asked the question of CalRecycle. So all of that led to a few weeks later, CalRecycle saying, oh, now that we have disclosed that we have more than $600 million in the budget, we'd like to propose a way to spend more than 300 million of that on improving the program. So that's the other piece that's moving through the legislature right now. And that's the piece that would provide new funding to provide convenient access for people.
Is that the budget trailer bill that we're talking about?
Yes.
So the bottle bill is sort of an interesting mix of numbers and politics. And I gather on that spectrum, you're probably more on the numbers side, right? You focus more on the numbers of the thing.
Yeah, I'd prefer to to just do my analysis and not have to do any lobbying at all.
Right. All right, Jeff, you've been queued up. Tell us about the budget reconciliation process and where you're going to spend the 46 million on.
All right. With what Susan does, it's absolutely amazing and frustrating, because what she's experienced from CalRecycle is that 3-card Monte or find the pea under the shell.
Mhm.
I mean, she's trying to track where the money is, but they keep moving it around. It's so frustrating. If this was a publicly traded company reporting their revenue to Wall Street, to the SEC, people would be in jail. It'd be criminal what they're doing. So go through a couple of things. Senate Bill 1013, adding wine and spirits. We wholeheartedly support it because Gallo, California-based company, they've been out of the program forever. They've never wanted to be in it. But with all sorts of different things that have been popping up, supply chain issues with China not getting enough wine bottles, they're getting back into the beneficiation business. So they're in support of it. They want to be in the program to generate cleaner material that will be recycled and turned into new bottles here in California, which is fantastic. However, with any bottle bill legislation, I asked 3 quick questions about the legislation. Will it open new recycling centers in underserved areas? Will it fix the payment structure to make sure that recycling centers in rural areas or high-cost areas like the Bay Area can stay in business? And does it address the grocer or dealer take-back requirement? Unfortunately, SB 1013 doesn't address any of that. It just adds more material into a struggling program. So those that can find a recycling center will probably experience longer lines. Those that can't find a recycling center will pay more taxes in the form of CRV, because it'll just go in their curbside bin or the garbage bin. So it's good that they're getting into the program. It's a great expansion, but we still have some major structural issues to address. I wish, I was sharing in that extra 46 million. The average recycling center will probably see about $300 or $3,000 a month in additional revenue to handle about 15 tons of glass. So for recycling centers, they're going to have longer lines, heavier material, and at the end of the day, at the end of the year, they might make $1,000 profit. It's not very attractive for the recycling centers because, again, longer lines, more heavier material.
So when you say aloud those 3 questions you ask yourself, I think, boy, that makes sense to me. Why wouldn't anybody want to do that? So in Sacramento, tell us, why doesn't anybody want to do those 3 things?
It's very complicated. It's like in high school yelling down the hallway, who wants to take AP physics? And everybody runs away. If you want to talk about, hey, who wants to fix the bottle bill? People run into their office. They don't want to talk about it because it's very complicated. Beverage manufacturers are involved, grocers are involved, cities are involved, conservation corps is involved, grocers are involved, can manufacturers, glass packaging, so many major stakeholders with big voices, not only in California, but nationally. And the recycling centers and the consumers just don't have a voice. They're trying to make everybody happy except the consumers that are putting the deposits down.
So even if we put Susan Collins in charge of CalRecycle, it wouldn't help?
She'd be my first choice.
Would she be able to answer your 3 questions positively?
I think she would have solutions rather quick. Whether the legislature would want to follow those recommendations, it's questionable, because they have so many people that have taken care of them to make changes to the bottle bill. It might take money away or cost stakeholders some additional money. We'll touch on it in a little bit, but Gallo got into the bottle bill. They've been out of it forever.
Notoriously.
But I think they're seeing getting into the bottle bill, although it might cost them $3 to $4 million a year, is cheaper than alternatives that are being talked about in Sacramento right now. So for people that want to recycle their material, take responsibility for their material, I think in the next few years, we'll see getting into the bottle bill, whether it's the California bottle bill or others nationally. It's a more efficient, cost-effective way to be responsible for your material, recover it, and recycle it in an environmentally friendly way. And I'm saying in the United States. Our aluminum is recycled in the United States. The glass is recycled in the United States. The PET and the HDPE is recycled in the United States. The curbside programs, more than half of their PET plastic is going to Mexico these days because of the contamination levels. It doesn't meet the domestic quality standards, yet they get paid for it. Kind of the same thing with the glass. They're going to get 46 million for doing very little. And several facilities that I know of, they ship material to a glass facility, and only about 40% of it is actual glass that will turn into a new bottle. The rest ends up in a landfill or as a cover material.
Well, that sounds bad. So Susan, I'm hearing more material in the bill, heavier stuff in the bill. Money's not getting shuffled over to the recycling, to the redemption center deserts. Anything afoot that's going to fix that?
I just don't think it'll be in that vehicle. I think it's going through this other vehicle, which is the budget trailer bill,
So,
which is sort of fitting because of the fact that it's expenditures, and the expenditures need to go in the budget bill. So it's sort of fitting that it's happening through a different vehicle.
so I don't understand the budget trailer process or how that's going to get money to the redemption centers. Can you fill that in?
Well, the budget trailer bill just means that there's the main draft of the budget, which already came out and went through a committee hearing last week. And by the way, it was a few weeks before that CalRecycle had come forward with their $330 million proposal. Mm-hmm. So the stuff that appears, or the language that appears in the full budget bill, which is hundreds of pages long or something, the full budget, it just has a single line item that says $330 million. It doesn't have any details attached to it at all. It doesn't break that down into what that $330 million would be spent on. The budget trailer bill would basically be an amendment. That's what they mean, an amendment to the budget. That's what that language means. And so what's being worked on in committee right now is something that has more details and has preferable solutions compared to CalRecycle's proposal. CalRecycle's proposal was presented to a budget committee. As Jeff mentioned, the legislative analyst's office kind of gave it a thumbs down. And so did every one of the legislators who was on that committee. And it was like in theory, it's a good idea to do some things to improve the program. And these particular measures that have been chosen in this language that CalRecycle developed were not exactly the right ones. So they're working on reworking it. Some of the concepts are similar, but it's just a different dollar amount. Some of the concepts in the CalRecycle proposal are just completely out the door, and some new ones are in there. I would say there's about a 30 or 40% overlap though. And so that language is being worked out. And it would go through the budget, which is appropriate because it's a spending measure.
So it's a little bit like a Brinks truck falls over on the street and $330 million rolls out in the middle of a busy street and everybody's fighting over who gets what. Is that about it?
There's the initial part of it does seem like that, because it was very surprising to see somebody come forward with a $330 million proposal. When the rest of us are used to dealing with budgets that look like, the thousands, not, if not, with 330 million where they just have line items that say 100 million for this, 50 million for that, it kind of blows your mind. But the folks who have been working on this budget trailer language in the budget committee, they have been working on it. They put together a proposal for a budget trailer bill last year. They've been working on this for more than a year. They didn't just get, a used envelope and scribble something down on the back of it. So a lot more thought has gone into it and a lot more research has gone into it. So I think they're going to come up with something decent, and it's not quite, a bunch of money falling from the sky sort of thing.
Are they going to come up with something decent, Jeff?
I hope so. I'll just go through Director Maki Wagner and the Finance Director. They approved releasing $330 million from the Beverage Container Fund, which is great. A lot of that has to do with, Susan has pointed out, the program's growing a surplus about 100 million a year right now in unredeemed deposits. So the original proposal, they were going to take $100 million and double the deposit from a nickel to a dime for 4 to 6 weeks.
Refund.
That's great. Refund. The refund. So people that have access to recycling centers could get double their deposits back. Good for them, but that's terrible for people that still don't have access to redemption centers. So that one, everybody just kind of shook their head at. They wanted to provide $50 million for RVMs for grocers, $50 million for RVMs for schools and universities, $70 million for rural pilot programs, $50 million for curbside quality incentive payments, $5 million for the Conservation Corps, $1 million for recycling center locator app, and then $2 million for recycling centers and $2 million for processors. So the people that are actually providing the service got the lowest amount. But I think, as Susan indicated, most people looked at it and said, I think we can do better. And Senator Wykowski, he sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee. A lot of questions from that committee. And they followed the Legislative Accounting Office's recommendation. They rejected the proposal as presented by the administration. And I think what we're going to see is a budget trailer bill coming out that is going to provide $40 million to open new recycling centers in underserved areas, $100 million for RVMs, and pay the grocers to provide the service of hosting the RVMs. So that kind of fixes the dealer issue that I've been talking about. $30 million for bag drop programs, $5 million for RVMs, $40 million for recycling centers as a supplemental payment to pay them back for declines in scrap value, and then all the work that they did as essential workers during COVID, incurring all the costs of PPE, dealing with employees, dealing with longer lines, all the things that they did. So it would be a $40 million supplemental for those recycling centers. 25 million would be put in for a reusable glass program because we did pass having reusable containers in the California program. This would provide 25 million for infrastructure, for collection and cleaning equipment to help launch a refillable program here in California, which would be great. providing $10 million for the California plastic reclaimers that are actually taking our plastic bottles and turning them into a new product here in California. And then $1 million for the recycling center locator app. And I think with the budget trailer bill, it's getting the bottle bill focused on redemption opportunities as the best mechanism for litter reduction. So I think that's what's coming down in the next few weeks. We should see it. A lot of discussions will happen in July and August. Hopefully we can get some sort of agreement going into August to get this approved and signed by the governor.
So it sounds like this is kind of a fluid process. You have figures allocated to certain things, but that's kind of subject to the, not to whimsy, but to the lobbying efforts of the various stakeholders with the legislatures that trying to reallocate this.
Yeah.
Right.
It's very
Right.
fluid.
A lot of negotiation, a lot of back and forth.
And with the bottle bill, the recycling centers and processors don't really have anything to give because there's other major stakeholders, labor, building trades. They're working on other bills where they can give and take a little bit with different bills. And the bottle bill might help them in other areas. But as far as recyclers and processors, not a lot to give and trade for other bills that are out there these days.
Mhm. So Susan, is there something out there that we should be worried about?
Yes,
What?
I'm glad because I was hoping to find a way in on this. Well, there's the thing that here in the office, we internally call this the PET fiasco. It is one sentence that could sort of take down the bottle bill program, or at least a portion of it, a big portion of it. And it came from a completely unlikely place. A couple of years ago, when AB 793 passed, that is the recycled content law, they had a de minimis provision in the law, which is very, very standard to have a de minimis provision. That just means that when they write a law like that, it is very common to say the smaller folks don't have to comply with this law. So in the case of this law, it's beverage manufacturers. Okay, all the beverage manufacturers have to have a certain amount, a certain percentage of recycled content in their PET bottles or plastic bottles, but will exempt the smaller beverage manufacturers from having to comply with the law. Normally, that provision is either triggered based on like the number of units that you sell, like maybe 200,000 units or something, or the dollar value of what you sell under, this many $1 million. But instead, in California, they decided to use a different de minimis provision that was already in the law for a different purpose. It had to do with reporting schedules. Do you have to report annually or monthly? So there was already this other de minimis provision. So they just linked to that. They said, okay, here's, anybody who has less than $15,000 in processing fees that they have to pay in. Now, the processing fees that they have to pay in are based on the number of units. It's a processing fee per unit that manufacturers have to pay into the bottle bill. That's the producer responsibility part of it. So normally that would be an okay way to do things. Here's where it gets tricky, and I'm going to name several things that are dependent on each other. This is like a Rube Goldberg machine where the swinging ball knocks down the domino, which hits something else. That's what this is like. Once the minimum content law went into place, manufacturers started doing what we hoped they would do. They started buying more recycled PET and started, in order to put more content into their bottles. Great, that's exactly what we wanted them to do. It was the whole point of the law. And because of that, it changed the supply-demand relationship, and prices for recycled PET went up. They went up so high that they are now more than the cost of recycling. And when they're more than the cost of recycling, that means there are no processing payments paid to recyclers. The processing fee that manufacturers pay is a percentage, like about 10% of what the processing payment is that goes to the recyclers, meaning the manufacturers pay about 10% and the fund pays the other 90% of these payments. Well, 10% of nothing is still nothing, right? So once that processing payment goes to zero, then it means the processing fees also go to zero, which means all of the manufacturers, regardless of size, even the largest manufacturers, are going to be paying zero in processing payments, in processing fees, I'm sorry, beginning January 1st, 2023. And once they do that, that triggers the de minimis provision, and all of the manufacturers will be exempt from the law. Then nobody will have to put any recycled content into their plastic bottles. Now, if you're confused, you should be. I know this was a crazy thing. I'm so sorry to have taken you on this ride of explaining how this works. We do have a fact sheet up on our website that explains all this. And if you're interested, you can kind of go through it more slowly. But the point is, the whole law, the recycled content law, will at that point be null and void. It'll be like it was never written, like we never went through that 7-year struggle to get a recycled content law in place in California. And indeed, California's recycled content law is the strongest in the world. It has the highest recycled content rate. It eventually goes from 15%, eventually up to 50%. That's even more than what they're doing in the European Union. You know, we had so much pride in that law, and it's just going to go right out the window unless the legislature fixes one sentence. We've given them the information for what that one sentence needs to be changed to. Just change it from a de minimis provision based on a dollar value to a de minimis provision based on the equivalent number of containers. Boom, one sentence. So far, I've talked to CalRecycle, I've talked to the author's office. They've all said, oh, we've heard about this. We understand the issue. Like, not even we'll get back to you. Just we're looking into it. So far, I'm a little frustrated. And if the next step I need to go to is going to the media with this, I'll do that.
Yeah, and with this item, maybe it was an oversight. It was just standard language that's put in. But I'd like to thank Susan for understanding AP calculus, AP physics, because some lobbyists might have put it in there intentional.
I was just going to
knowing that this could knock out the beverage manufacturers from being required to have post-consumer content. Susan caught it. CalRecycle right now is not answering the question. I've asked Director Maki Wagner to get an opinion, what CalRecycle would do, and I have 4 emails that are unanswered.
So it is confusing, Susan. I kind of understand it because I kind of understand loopholes, and I kind of understand certain amount of history where it's been pretty clear that people with degrees in AP, with AP physics and AP chemistry, have cleverly written things just like that to help themselves. So I wondered too, was this somebody at the legislative office being lazy and linking this thing, one thing to another? Or was this sort of a deliberate intent, thinking that there aren't very many Susan Collinses around that are going to call attention to this? And if we camouflage this enough, if we keep it quiet enough, we'll just slide this thing through. Which of those do you think this is?
I don't know. I get asked that. I've been asked that question for 10 years, evil or stupid. I don't know. I've never known the answer to that. But I do know that it was a complete accident that I stumbled upon this. It was one of those moments where I was looking for something else. I happened to go to a certain webpage on CalRecycle's webpage. I was working on something else. This wasn't the topic I was curious about, but I read one sentence, and then all of a sudden it all came together, and I understood. You know, I had read that bill multiple times as we were supporting it, as it was going through the legislature. We had done financial analysis on that bill, and I think kind of saved it at the last minute because CalRecycle was put together sort of a doom and gloom financial scenario, and we put together a different financial analysis saying, no, we think this bill will pay for itself. And I'm glad I'm saying these words out loud because I forgot to tell you something really interesting. Not only is this a bill that will, lead to this recycled content, which is exactly what we want for environmental reasons, but when those prices are high and the processing payments go to zero, that's worth $90 million a year to the beverage container fund. That's how much the fund is paying in processing payments for plastic every year. So this isn't just one sentence gets us recycled content. This is change one sentence and save $90 million a year for the beverage container fund.
Do you have a fact sheet that lays all this out that you can send to me that I can distribute?
Absolutely. It's already up on our website. It's on the publications page.
Okay.
It's also, we have a special page called the California Crisis page.
Okay.
And I can send it to you. And I can't remember if I put in the $90 million thing into our fact sheet. And if I need to revise our fact sheet to put in the financial implications, I will do that. I should probably put it in the very first paragraph.
Yeah, I know I'd like to look at that.
Sure thing. I'll write it down right now, John.
So I want to ask Jeff one more question, but before I do, Ken, are you on the phone? There's somebody that says iPhone there, and I wanted to see if you got back on the call. And you're muted also. Hearing nothing, I'll assume he didn't. That's too bad because we had some other questions we wanted to ask him. So we need to wrap up, and I promised in the invite that we would talk about something else that I think is very interesting politically, which is the apparent conflict between SB 54, which is targeting single-use plastics, and the Recology initiative, which is qualified for the ballot, which I can't seem to find anywhere to read, which also seems to target that. And I have to believe that neither of these things are going to do exactly what they say, because it never works that way. But tell us a little about the conflict that's going on, and if you know where this notion of chemical recycling is coming into the fray.
Can you
So is
take
that
that
for
one,
me?
Jeff?
Yeah, for you, Jeff.
Is that for me?
SB 54 and Recology, the tension in the politics.
Yeah, SB 54 by Senator Ben Allen would address plastic and producer responsibility. It would basically say that the producers of single-use plastic have to create products that are recyclable or compostable by 2030. And then they will have to take responsibility for the recycling of those items. So it would set up producer responsibility organizations for their own items. So it would be run outside of CalRecycle. The counter to it is the Recology Plastic Initiative, and the staff analysis for Senate Bill 54 has a little synopsis of the Recology ballot initiative that's titled the California Recycling and Plastic Pollution Redemption Act of 2020. What this would do is it would put a fee on all single-use plastic items, and it would generate between 1.5 and $2 billion a year of tax revenue that would go to CalRecycle, and then CalRecycle would then run the recycling programs for these unique plastics. So CalRecycle would be in charge of finding the markets, finding the infrastructure, figuring out the collection process.
And let me guess, Recology might get some of that money.
Yeah, the initiative, it was written with a lot of brilliance behind it. Nonprofit organizations, I believe, would share in 20% of that money. So the nonprofit organizations, Surfrider, Heal the Bay, Sierra Club, would have 20% of $1.5 to $2 billion a year.
That's smart.
So
That's smart politics.
yeah, 300 million to 400 million.
Right.
I have a friend who has a last beach cleanup nonprofit, and we're going to get some gold rakes, and we're going to go clean up some beaches. So they bought off the NGOs. A lot would go to infrastructure and collection, and due to a Supreme Court decision that says that if material is worth zero, where it sits, it falls under local franchise agreements, which means the local waste haulers have the first right for the collection of negative value material. So a high percentage of that 1.5 to $2 billion a year would go towards, I think, the waste hauling companies. Cities would also get, I believe, 10% of the money for their outreach and development of local programs. The problem that we're facing, though, with plastic is very little plastic is actually recyclable, because the polymers are all created differently. The technology is not there. We know we can recycle clear PET bottles, not so much with green PET bottles. Your new orange or green Tide PET bottles, you can't recycle them. Once you put a color or a pigment in a plastic, you can't remove it. So the best you're going to get out of it is a melted down black plastic that might make a battery box for a car. It might make a glove compartment for a car, but it's not really recycling it back into the same product. It's kind of downcycling it. So because plastics are so complicated, the actual recycling technology for all these different spoons, straws, bags, plastic Easter eggs, it's just not available. So the engineers and the producers have come up with a technology that would melt it down and turn it into a low-grade petroleum product that could then be used in agricultural equipment as a diesel fuel. And they call it advanced recycling. But I think most people would say that it's just combustion in a different form. They're taking a plastic bag, melting it down into oil again, and then burning it in a combustion engine. So both Senate Bill 54 and the Recology initiative, I'm sure there's going to be some discussion about that, because the technology to actually recycle all these different plastics and plastic types, it just doesn't exist out there.
Who's going to say so?
Who's going to say what?
That these plastics aren't recyclable.
I think the market's going to say, because you're not going to have people that can handle the material in the quantity or the quality that is collected through mixed programs. I think with SB 54, producers would probably look at opting into the bottle bill, kind of like Gallo did, because it's already a vehicle that's running. It has a infrastructure of redemption centers where people can take their containers back. They're collected, clean, they're separated, and they're high quality. So somebody could do something with that clean product. But once it gets put into a curbside bin, a commercial bin, it runs through a solid waste sorting facility. It rubs up against glass and dirt and spaghetti sauce, other plastics, metal. It gets connected with a lot of other stuff that's difficult to come out. But worst case is there's chemicals in there, chlorines, acids, pesticides. So right now, the only food grade bottle to bottle is clear PET coming from buyback centers. You cannot get bottle to bottle PET from curbside material. FDA won't certify that. The producers have acknowledged that the contamination level is too high of a concern. So that's why the increase in the PET price has gone up so much in the last 12 months, as Susan had talked about. The producers need this high quality buyback clear PET. So SB 54 would create multiple stewardship programs. The Recology initiative would create an incredibly well-funded, I'll call it an incredibly high tax, $1.5 to $2 billion a year program run by CalRecycle for technology that, to my understanding, doesn't exist for most of the plastics that they're addressing. But the biggest concern for me for both of these is it would tell consumers, Plastics are recyclable. Keep buying them. We have the producers that are responsible for them, or we have CalRecycle that's responsible. Get as many bags as you want. Go for it. It doesn't change behavior. It'll enable the behavior that a lot of us have become accustomed to. At some point, we just have to say, plastics are not recyclable. Certain types of plastics are not recyclable. They're safer in the landfill. If you're not happy with that, don't buy them. I go to Subway and I ask for a sandwich and they put it in a plastic bag and I say, I don't need a plastic bag. They still look at me like I'm crazy. You know, I go to Starbucks every now and then with my refillable mug and I ask them if they can fill it up. Some do, some don't. And they give me a clear PET coffee. And it's just, we need to change behavior before we enable it. And I think both SB 54 and the ballot initiative could continue to enable the behavior that I think we're all concerned about.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'll turn it over to the group. So that's a pretty bleak picture. Nobody seems likely to pass a bill saying just say no to plastic. So it sounds like there's a negotiation right now between the SB 54 people and the Recology people. Where is it going to come out? And is there a way for it to come out where it won't be terrible?
Yeah, a lot of stuff's happening right now. June 30th is a big date because there's 3 sponsors of the ballot initiative, 2 nonprofits. I think Oceana is one of them. I think the 2 nonprofits are willing to pull it from the ballot initiative because they're seeing enough progress of the producers with SB 54. But at this point, it doesn't sound like Recology is ready to take it off the ballot. But June 30th is the last day to pull something from the ballot. If they don't, all 3 of them have to pull it. If they don't, it's getting voted on. And then that puts the producers in a position where they'll really have to step up and do more to get SB 54 passed. Otherwise, they could face this massive $1.5 to $2 billion a year tax increase with the programs run by CalRecycle. So June 30th is the date to watch. And then if it gets pulled, that means SB 54 has a lot of support. If it doesn't get pulled, it's going to be a very exciting July and August to see what happens with the negotiations.
Well, I could keep asking you 2 questions for hours because it's really, really interesting, but we try to finish by 7-ish. It is my 42nd wedding anniversary tonight. Whew. So let me ask the group if there are any questions of Susan or Jeff. We've covered a lot of stuff, complicated stuff. It's hard to drill down to the bottom, and the bottom line always is it's complicated, and it takes a while to unscramble complicated, and it's not easy to unscramble it, and it's not easy to make it simple when you unscramble it, and that's one of the hard things that we face in zero waste is overcoming that. But if anybody has questions of Jeff or Susan, please raise your hand. Dan, unmute.
Thank you, John. Well, I put this in the chat very briefly. It's an idea, not a reality, except in Urban Ore's case. But last year, we finally got something we'd been asking for a long time. The city of Berkeley decided to pay us $47.74 per ton for every ton we keep out of the landfill. So it's basically a service fee. The way I explained it in the chat is that this is based on the idea that the customers at the transfer station pay $126 a ton to dump there. And they in order to get in, they have to pay out that much money. $47.74 per ton is a percentage of that. And it's exactly the same amount of money as it would cost the city of Berkeley to haul that very same ton to the Altamont landfill. And I think they chose that on that account. What if there was a similar thing done? And the only way I can think of to do it would probably be a citizens initiative statewide or something like that. Because I don't know that you could get it through the legislature, but maybe. To pay the redemption. You know, Jeff, you just keep talking about how, and I feel for you, man, as an operator, you're not getting paid for the service you're providing, which is to say, keeping things out of landfill. And that just is wrong. It's just wrong. So somehow or other that needs to be got around. And I think we're at least a precedent that you might want to think about as you go about your business. What would $47.74 per ton do for you if you got something like that?
The average recycling centers, they're handling about 40 tons a month with glass, aluminum, and plastic.
Multiply that by $47.74.
$1,600 a month. You know, it's nothing people would turn down. In lower cost areas, that would be a good number. In the Bay Area, it would help. Not sure it would pay the electric bill, but it would help.
What's your tonnage?
Our Hayward facility, between our Hayward and 2 Sacramento facilities, we're handling about 25,000 tons a month of recyclables.
Multiply that by $47.74.
But that's coming from other recycling centers that are the ones that are actually receiving it.
Well,
so
how this would be split up, but anyway, there's a principle involved here.
Yeah, I'm sure with SB 54 or the ballot initiative, they would look at those mechanisms to find ways to collect and sort material out of the waste stream.
Well, but in order to do that, you got to get paid for it because it's expensive. And so, that's basically what this was designed to do for us. You know, not a big amount of money for us either. It's about $3,600 a month for us right now. But it is an incentive to do more. Our salvagers, basically it's our salvagers that bring in that money.
Yeah, the curbside processing facilities these days are running operating costs anywhere from $100 to $180 to $200 a ton.
Yep.
To sort the curbside material. So the $47 or $50 a ton might not entice them to pull additional material.
Interesting.
Any other questions for our guests? Yes, Amy?
Hi, thank you so much for all the information. I have a couple zero waste stores in the Bay Area. So I also do a lot of presentations on changing buying behavior, on cutting out single-use plastics. And I thought these bills were a great idea until, Jeff, you just said that you're right, it would help or enable or excuse people's behavior for continuing to purchase and use single-use plastics. And that's what I deal with all the time, is trying to get people to change their buying behavior. What would you both, you and Susan, suggest be a solution? Like, what can we do? What can be done?
So SB 43, Senator Ben Allen, it was approved last year and signed by the governor. It will take the recycling symbol, the word recyclable, compostable, it'll take it off of most items that don't meet the criteria that California Recycling Commission approved. So it would start taking that word and the big chasing arrows off of most of the products. And hopefully that would get people to stop throwing stuff in curbside that they think is recyclable or it has the recycling symbol on it, and allow the curbside programs to kind of reset and focus on recycling and quality instead of quantity and diversion. The biggest item I keep telling people is China did not stop accepting recyclables. They stopped accepting trash and contamination or non-recyclable material in bales of material that is recyclable, like mixed paper or cardboard. China is still accepting cardboard. They're still accepting mixed paper, just not with contamination and garbage that we were shipping. I'd like to see SB 343 take hold, because I think both SB 54 and the ballot initiative would basically neuter that and say, we're going to recycle it for you, 8 years from now, and not change anybody's behavior. I would like to see the expansion of the bottle bill for some additional items. It's very tough to look at milk and dairy products. Those have been kind of don't go there, but that might be something to look at. You have plastic thermoforms, PET cups that you might find at the Coliseum or the Chase Center. There's a lot of items that could get into the bottle bill that would give people the opportunity to get those back to a recycling center where they're kept clean and high quality. But you have to fix the convenience issue and the funding issue of those recycling centers first, before you start adding additional items. Kind of like I addressed with wine and spirits, it's great, but it's just adding more material to a struggling program.
Susan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. This is just off the top of my head, but if we were funding what we really wanted to fund, first of all, I'll say that when the budget change proposal first came out, we wrote a long letter of response that was not only why we thought that the measures in the budget change proposal weren't a good idea. We did an analysis and said, here's what they would do and why that's not good enough. But we also had a big section at the front saying, here's what we think is really needed in this program. One of those things was funding for a washing facility, which is the key. If you want to do refillables, the refillables have to go to a washing facility. And I was so happy when I saw the preview of the budget change proposal that's being reworked, that there's like more than $20 million in there for washing facility. Like, yay, somebody heard, somebody read the letter that we sent in. I don't know if that'll make it to the final round, but you asked the question, what would we like to fund? So I'll just name some things and you guys can think of things like this too. One, real public education, really educate the public about the things that we've been talking about on this call, about things that don't work and why they don't work and why they shouldn't be using things. Like, I tell everybody, I haven't had paper towels in our house for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years. You don't need them. You can use rags. There's just like a million things like that you can educate people on. You don't need dryer sheets either, but also about why these things aren't recyclable. Just stop using them. If some of this funding, the budget or the initiative would raise $1.5 billion per year. Well, what if we had funding that funded packaging free stores that people could go to and get stuff that's truly zero waste stuff? Because those are few and far between. We need a lot more of them throughout our state. What about water bottle filling stations? What about programs, going broad scale with putting a deposit on takeout food containers that are standardized amongst restaurants in a city so that you can put a deposit on it, use it for your takeout food, and then return it. I know before the pandemic, I would just take my own containers when I got takeout, and I would only go to the restaurants that would actually fill them. But if you standardize the containers, then it would be a thing that all the restaurants could do. Those are just a few ideas, but gosh, wouldn't that be exciting if we were funding that stuff?
That would be exciting.
I'm just going to add one more thing, kind of related to the bottle bill. I mentioned it before, is the bottle bill has the retailers, the people who sell the products. That's the fallback on taking that material back if you can't find a redemption center. If we're looking at waste reduction, increased recycling, they're going after the producers, the people that are making these items, but it's really the people that are selling them to you. Is Amazon a producer or are they retailer. So if Amazon were to take back all the cardboard boxes and all the packaging that they're dropping on our doorsteps or our lock boxes, I think Amazon is handling 300,000 tons of cardboard every month or every year. I forget the number. It's a big number, plus the film bubble packaging that they're putting in there. If they put that burden on the producers, I think there should be some consideration on the people that are actually using and selling those products and delivering them to the consumers.
Okay, any more questions? Mary Lou, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I had spent several years on the board of the British Columbia Bottle Recycling and Depot Association. And all of Canada, but certainly British Columbia, is working under the concept of extended producer responsibility. And producers are defined in ways that have nothing to do with the manufacturing or the use of the recovered resource in making new things. The producer, a paper producer, for example, might be your local stationery supply store. And they have to pay funds into the producer organization. So you would think that defining a producer would be a little easier, but it's either in British Columbia, it's the organization that manufactures something, or it's the first importer, or it's somebody who distributes. So there has been zero change in packaging or any other thing. The biggest change has been recyclers going out of business. So be careful how you define producer, because it does not mean manufactured. People want to think that. It's a natural thing to think producer means the people who made it, but not in the legislation. Thanks, John.
Any other questions for our panel? Well, then I'm going to adjourn in a moment. I want to thank Susan and Jeff for being here. I always dread having a session about the bottle bill because it always reduces to the two words, it's complicated. And it is complicated, and it seems almost insoluble. It's so complicated. But once a year, at least, we need to hear again why it's important and what the big issues are. So thank you both for being here. It's a thrill for me to have you here. I'm sorry that Ken wasn't able to be here for questions. Next month, we're going to talk about scavenging. The ancestor of zero waste was scavenging, and people who scavenged, people who were usually on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, that found a way to make a living and put food on their table by recovering what other people discarded and making it reusable or repurposed it. So we're going to talk about that next month. We're going to have a scrapyard dealer. We're going to have hopefully someone from academia who will talk about how indigenous peoples in California recycle or not. So I hope you join us again. It's the second Tuesday of every month, 5 o'clock cocktails, 5:30 show starts on time, recycling archives, and a hot topic. Thanks again for being here tonight, and we'll see you next month.